Welcome to the place where we learn about and learn from the leaders in our field who are powering creativity. I'm Aaron Dworkin, and this is Arts Engines. Thanks again for joining me here on Arts Engines. Today's guest is Johann Zietsman, who serves as president and CEO of the Adrienne Arsht Center for the Performing Arts. Johann, welcome to the show.
Welcome, Aaron, here from Miami, where it's always sunny, as they say. Good to see you again. Always fun to be with you, whether it's in a pub in New York or in Detroit or at Carnegie Hall. I mean, we've connected in so many different places. Always good to see you.
Absolutely, absolutely. The feeling is very mutual. And not only that, but the work that you do, not only at the Arsht, but just in our field has truly been extraordinary. And so I have been very lucky to be able to see the impact of your arts leadership and your work up close. And I thought it might be good for just those in our art audience. Could you kind of just share a quick overview of the Arsht, the breadth of and impact of the programming that you're doing there?
Yeah, so in a nutshell, the organization is 19 years old. We're in our 19th season, celebrating 20 next year. Architecturally, it's a beautiful building designed by Cesar Pelli, a 2,000 plus concert hall and a 2,000 plus theater for ballet, opera, Broadway on either side of US 1, which is kind of unique. And it's connected by a bridge. And we have a couple of black boxes, an education center. We do all the kind of regular programming you might expect, Broadway, jazz, but we also do gospel, we do flamenco, we do a whole lot of one-night kind of presentations of various kinds of music. We live in, an incredibly diverse community, and our programming reflects that all throughout what we do. So you could expect to see the best of the best here, and that's true of the Arsht. But we also do an incredible amount of work around education and community engagement. We have something like 25 different programs that run. We reach about 80,000 school children every year. We bus them here, or we go to visit them in their schools. We work with the disabled. We work with cancer patients. We work with people in all kinds of pockets of life. Because we believe that exposing people from all walks and all places in their lives to the arts is always a good thing. It's always a positive piece of their world and a positive impact in their lives, wherever they might be and wherever they might come from. So very proud of the education and community engagement work we do, and I think it's very impactful, changes lives in so many ways, and we've seen lives change in very dramatic and wonderful ways.
That's awesome, and of course just reflects, right, this power of the arts, and it really is just incredible programming that you're doing. So what I'd love to kind of do, because I think that especially from this perspective of all of your leadership over your entire career, but especially there in Miami and the various communities that must comprise the constituencies that you're responsible to and for, that a lot of people, and I know a lot in our audience, have been kind of struggling with this idea of kind of, is there censorship taking place in the arts, or is there various influences of how they're doing programming, these types of things, and that some people feel it's coming from one direction, some people feel it comes from another direction. And so especially kind of for programmers, as well as just, everyone who's involved in our field, do you have kind of any thoughts about this, both in terms of what you may have experienced and or suggestions for arts leaders as they're thinking about these pressures and or influences that they may feel from different sources?
Aaron, I've been an arts executive for more than 40 years now, and in different countries. And firstly in South Africa, and then in the US, and then in Canada, and back here in the US now. And that question and that issue takes different shapes and forms wherever you go. The context, the historic context, you can imagine that topic under apartheid South Africa had a very specific slant, and it had a completely different slant when South Africa democratized. Then suddenly this idea of what might or what may or may not be on stage had a whole different set of parameters around it. But I've felt so committed in all my professional life to the idea of freedom of artistic expression and freedom of speech. I don't think you can be an arts executive and not take that seriously. I think it must be very difficult to work in an arts organization where you are supposed to expose the best of what artists can do, and then put limits around it because an external force is playing a role in your world. I remember in South Africa during apartheid, I wanted to transform a theater to a more democratic theater, and not all white and just for white audiences. And doing that was difficult. It was dangerous. It was not popular. But we felt very committed to it because Black artists had beautiful stories to tell. They inspired everybody, white or black. They helped us begin to understand the other. They helped us see a bigger worldview. And they started preparing people's hearts and minds to begin to think differently about different races long before the politicians got there. And that's the thing about freedom of expression in the arts specifically. I remember this phrase that Leonard Bernstein said something about when we touch each other through music, you touch somebody in spirit and heart and mind and soul all together. You touch people in such impactful ways through the arts. And so to put a limit on it is to stop the influence that artists who are, I think, the seers of the future. I think they are the tellers of the future. They see the past and talk about the past too, but they often take us to new places with a broad perspective. So I feel so committed to that idea that even though we are in an environment now and a state in Florida where there is some guardrails or protection of certain things that you can and cannot do and say, it's very difficult, and I wish it wasn't true. But I think if we focus on doing what the arts do and just focus on the good work that we can do through the arts, we can pretty much allow artists to say what they want to say. That doesn't mean that we should behave irresponsibly or illegally. I mean, if there's a law that says you cannot do this or that, you're supposed to act within the law, whether you like it or not. That's just how it is in any country. But within that, I think we could still find ways for artists to express and take us to new places and help us understand new places and different ideas. But I think we're losing a piece of humanity and a piece of potential if we censor. But I think what bugs me most about a version of censorship now is this idea of demonizing anybody who disagrees with you. That's censorship in a different way. That says only certain opinions are welcome or right, and if they don't agree with me, then there must be something wrong with those people. That's an ugly thing that's creeping into society that doesn't necessarily come from government. And I think we in the arts need to fight against that by opening people's hearts and minds to the other again. As I said, not only build the bridges, but help people to walk over in two directions. We will always have people who differ with whatever point of view we hold. And I think that's good. I think that's healthy. And I think the arts is a safe environment through this universal language in a non-threatening way where we can expose each other to those ideas without having to fight.
Right. And so I'm curious, right? And I'm sure there's those in our audience, right? Especially in leadership roles, and let's say especially leadership programmatic roles, for example, who are like, we absolutely feel the same way, right? And the art should be this space and so on and so forth. They're like, but in this circumstance, I can't do this, right? Or in this circumstance, I'm certainly not going to do that. Wondering if any pragmatic suggestions or approaches that you take that you can share with those where, let's just say, two extremes. One where there's pressures to not program a particular work because it might be coming from and that pressure is coming from conservative sides or donors who are saying we don't want that presented in our theater or something along those lines, and then someone else who's wanting to program something, but maybe for in their community there's a groundswell of that's not a topic we want discussed, and so that might there are pressures on that. In either of those scenarios, any pragmatic suggestions for leaders who are saying, I don't want to take a side or make a statement. I want to present the art. I want to be the place where the discussion or argument or disagreement takes place in and through artistic expression?
Great question. And I wish I could, have great answers for all those. But I've been in those circumstances, and you have to find your way through. Firstly, generally speaking, all out throughout my career, I think if a donor has a lot of strings attached, then I'd rather not take the money. I think that's a slippery slope. It's a very difficult place to put yourself and your organization in. If a donor says, here's my money, but you can only do a show like this and like that, and it must be like this and that. So we always help donors understand that their work supports work that we do, but they can't have programmatic veto or final say. And so far, touch with most donors that I've worked with, are just philanthropists. They just want to support the work we do. And they usually want to support something that they've already seen you do. So maybe their risk isn't quite as high, but it's tough to take the money and then have strings attached. It's very, very difficult for both parties. That's a conflict waiting to happen. And then government's restrictions. I'll give you a very specific example, and I don't want to get into trouble here, but in Florida, there was the Don't Say Gay law, a so-called Don't Say Gay law that came out, 4 years ago or something. And people interpreted that in all kinds of ways, and it went crazy. And that's the way social media is now. Everything is hyped. It's extremes. And so here's a piece of pragmatic advice. I actually put my hands on the actual piece of legislation, and I read it in detail. I read what it actually says, not what people say it says, not what social media says it does. It never says, no, don't say gay. It doesn't use those words anywhere in the legislation. But also specifically, the things that they were concerned about is exposing underage kids to, it was also the Child Protection Act, exposing underage kids to inappropriate content. Now, I've never had a problem with that idea. As a parent, I also want to protect my children against what I consider to be inappropriate content. The question then is who decides what's appropriate and what's not? And in my view, the parents should decide. So when we did shows that have so-called adult content, we would have disclaimers. We would put notices up at the doors to say, if you go in here, you might see or hear things that might be not appropriate. You make the decision. Are you going to take your child in here or not? The actual act also specifies very clearly how the government of Florida is going to evaluate whether something falls foul of the act. And there are 3 tests that they apply to evaluate whether this piece of work is outside the bounds of the law. And those are very, very clear and not very difficult and not very onerous 3 tests. And nothing that we do would fall foul of those tests, nothing. But if I listen to the hype and the way people think this thing was going to be impacting our programming, I would almost have to, stop half of our programming. I think it's important to really understand the words of the law, the intent of it, what the definition might be. before we react so crazily. So I'm asking always my team and so just stay calm, figure out what it actually means, and then just stay within those strict parameters. And we haven't, we've had drag shows, we've had all kinds of wonderfully expressive things here in the Arsht with that law in place because we stay within certain parameters, and it's not that hard to do. And I don't think it's restrictive in a way that we can't do certain things. We just have to do them in the right way. So, I don't know if I've answered your question, but
no, and one of the things that I love is kind of the diligence of kind of not leading by what is being kind of said, especially on social media, but rather leading by, of course, your constituents and serving your community, but also the diligence and the responsibility of an administrator to do the diligence of what is the law, what
right.
are these regulations, so that we don't overcomes or end up not doing programming because of a fear of something that's actually been, had a crescendo added to it because of public outcry, and kind of taking that beyond. And I know definitely there are some people, today with a host of new laws and regulations and things coming even nationally, looking and saying, okay, but what does this actually mean, and how can I operate in this and still serve my art form, my constituents, et cetera?
The other piece of your question was about what if the community that you operate in has certain boundaries that they would like you to respect. And in that piece, I can just say I've always felt the importance of serving the community in which you operate and being relevant to that community and be sensitive to that community and listening to them, understanding them, and then responding appropriately. And if there's a certain thing that the community that I live in really feel passionately is not something they're going to support, I'm going to listen to that. I don't think that's censorship, as we discussed earlier. I also don't think that's demonizing, but you have to be sensitive. Some communities are very lean in one direction or another direction, or culturally have more of these kind of people than those kind of people. And you have to be sensitive, because ultimately the art that we make is a form of communicating with my community about the issues that we want to talk about. And if it's not relevant, or they don't care about it or oppose it, then it's just not smart to do it.
Totally. Well, the work that, of course, you are doing at the Arsht is truly extraordinary. Unfortunately, we are just about out of time, but I always like to ask of all my guests, so this work, right, there must be times, especially with some decisions like this, where it may seem like there are obstacles that can't be overcome. Just wondering, as like an arts leader, as you think of kind of how you approach these situations, any mechanisms or key thing that you do when kind of times are the toughest that help you through them?
Well, one simple word would just explain some of it, and that's compartmentalizing. I think you have to be able to say, okay, the emotional part belongs here. I'm over that now. Now let's get practical and pragmatic and figure it out. I don't think you can live in this world where all of these things can bump into each other and be happy and move along. So I'll just say that. And I think in saying that, I also want to say I'm intentional with myself, and hopefully inspiring my teams to be intentional about focusing on the joy and the possibilities captured in this wonderful medium that we have in our hands. Even if it's really tough during COVID or government this or funding that, we are still in the most amazing profession you can imagine. We have in our hands this tool that can change humanity, that can make lives better. The possibilities of this, Aaron, whatever the restrictions, is still just so amazing that I just always try to turn my eyes to that and say, you know what, I'm still doing the best job ever. And I'm just going to find the joy and the possibilities.
Johann Zietsman, you truly are one of the arts engines who is powering human creativity in our world. Thank you so much for everything you do, and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Aaron. Great to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.